Jake Morrison walked down the bright corridor of the UES Harmony and felt his stomach twist with nerves. He had never been on a diplomatic mission before, and certainly never worked with aliens. The ship was huge and clean, with white walls and blue lights everywhere. Other crew members passed by him wearing their neat uniforms and looking like they knew exactly what they were doing. Jake wished he felt the same way. He stopped at door number 47 and checked his assignment pad again. This was it. His new home. For the next 6 months, and the place where he would be living with a Zephyrian. Jake had seen pictures of them during his training, but never met one in person. They were tall and thin with blue skin that looked like you could see through it. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their faces were longer than human faces. The most interesting thing about them was how they could make their skin glow with different colors to show their feelings. Jake pressed the door button, and it slid open with a soft whoosh. The room was bigger than he expected with 2 sleeping areas on opposite sides. One side looked normal with a regular bed and desk. The other side was completely different. Instead of a bed, there was a tall, narrow space built into the wall that looked like a standing closet. Jake figured that must be where Zephyrians slept. He was putting his clothes away when he heard footsteps behind him. Jake turned around and saw his new roommate for the first time. She was even taller than he thought she would be, standing at least 7 feet high. Her skin was a pale blue color, and he could see darker blue lines running through it like veins. Her 4 arms moved gracefully as she walked, and her large eyes were a bright silver color. On her forehead was a small device that Jake knew was a translator. "Hello, Jake Morrison," she said in perfect English, though her voice sounded musical and soft. "I am Lyra Kavan, but you may call me Lyra if that is easier for you." "Nice to meet you, Lyra," Jake said, trying not to stare. "I hope we can work well together." "I believe we will," Lyra replied. "I have studied human behavior extensively and find your species quite fascinating. I look forward to learning more about your customs during our time together." Jake smiled and felt some of his nervousness fade away. Lyra seemed friendly enough, and her English was much better than he expected. They spent the next few hours getting to know each other and setting up their shared living space. Lyra explained that she was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life forms. She was particularly interested in how different species adapted to living together. Jake told her about his job as a cultural liaison and how he was supposed to help humans and Zephyrians understand each other better. Everything was going smoothly until the lights suddenly dimmed and an alarm started beeping. The ship's computer announced that there was a problem with the life support system, and all crew members needed to conserve energy immediately. The temperature in their room began to drop quickly, and Jake could see his breath in the air. "Emergency. Protocols are now in effect," the computer said. "Heating systems offline. Estimated repair time 6 hours. All personnel should take steps to maintain body heat." Jake rubbed his arms and shivered. The room was getting colder by the minute, and he knew it was going to be a long night. He went to his storage locker and pulled out extra blankets and his warmest clothes. When he turned around, he saw Lyra standing very still with her arms wrapped around herself. Her skin had changed from blue to a darker purple color. "Are you cold?" Jake asked. "Yes," Lyra said. "Zephyrians do not handle low temperatures well. Our home world is much warmer than this." Jake looked at the 2 sleeping areas and had an idea. His grandmother always told him that the best way to stay warm was to share body heat with another person. He had done it before during camping trips when the heater broke in their tent. It was just a practical solution to a problem. "Lyra," he said carefully, "would it be okay if we shared sleeping space tonight? Humans sometimes do this when it gets cold. 2 people together stay warmer than 1 person alone." Lyra tilted her head, and her eyes seemed to glow brighter. "This is a human custom, sharing sleeping spaces. Well, not exactly a custom, Jake said. More like something we do when we need to. Survive. It keeps us warm. I see, Lyra said, and her skin began to pulse with different colors. Jake wished he knew what that meant. Yes, I think this would be acceptable. I do not wish to become too cold. Jake pushed the two sleeping areas together as much as he could and laid out all their blankets on his bed. It was going to be tight, but they could both fit. Lyra watched him work with great interest and asked many questions about why humans did things certain ways. Do all humans share sleeping spaces when cold? She asked. Not all the time, Jake said. But when we need to stay warm, or when we trust someone, we sometimes do. Friends do this. Family members do this. People who care about each other. Interesting, Lyra said. Zephyrians sleep alone always. We stand in our alcoves and rest individually. I have never shared sleeping space with another being. Well, there's a first time for everything, Jake said. Don't worry, it's not weird or anything. Just practical. They climbed under the blankets together, and Jake was surprised by how warm Lyra was despite her cold appearance. Her skin felt smooth and gave off a gentle heat. She was very still at first, but gradually relaxed as the warmth built up between them. This is quite comfortable, Lyra said softly. I can understand why humans might choose to do this even when not cold. Jake smiled in the darkness. Yeah, it's nice having someone there. Makes you feel less alone? Less alone? Lyra repeated, like she was testing the words. Yes, I think I understand this concept now. They talked quietly for a while about their homeworlds and their families. Jake learned that Zephyrians lived for over 200 years and spent most of their time studying and learning. Lyra learned that humans lived much shorter lives, but tried to experience as much as possible. As the night went on, Jake found himself enjoying their conversation more than he expected. Lyra was smart and curious, and asked questions that made him think about things in new ways. Eventually, they both fell asleep, still sharing the warmth under their pile of blankets. Jake's last thought before drifting off was that maybe this mission wouldn't be so bad after all. The next morning, Jake woke up feeling warmer than he had in days. The heating system was working again, and their room was back to normal temperature. Lyra was already awake and sitting at her desk writing in what looked like a journal. Her skin was back to its normal blue color, and she seemed very focused on her work. Good morning, Jake said as he stretched and got out of bed. Good morning, Jake, Lyra replied without looking up. I have been recording my observations about human sleeping customs. Very fascinating. Jake went to brush his teeth and get ready for the day. When he came back, Lyra was still writing. He could see that she had filled several pages with notes and drawings. Her handwriting was neat and precise, with lots of details about everything they had done the night before. Over the next few weeks, Jake noticed that Lyra watched him and the other humans very carefully. She carried her journal everywhere and was always writing things down. She studied how humans ate their meals together and talked about their feelings. She watched how they touched each other on the shoulder or shook hands. She was particularly interested in how human friends acted around each other. Jake, she said one evening as they were having dinner in their room, I have a question about human friendship bonds. Sure, what do you want to know? Jake said. Do all human friends share sleeping spaces like we did that first night? Lyra asked. Is this how humans create strong friendships? Jake almost choked on his food. Well, not exactly. That was more about staying warm and surviving. Most human friends don't actually sleep in the same bed, but you said that people who care about each other do this, Lyra said, looking confused. And you said friends do this. I mean, sometimes, Jake said, trying to explain. Like if they're camping or if there's an emergency. But usually friends have their own beds. Lyra wrote something in. Her journal and her skin flickered with different colors. I see. So it is a special friendship ritual that happens only in certain situations. Jake wasn't sure that was right either, but he didn't want to confuse her more. Yeah, something like that. A few days later, Captain Rodriguez announced that Jake and Lyra would be going on a survey mission to study an ice planet called Frost Prime. They would take a small shuttle and spend 3 days collecting samples and taking measurements. Jake was excited because it would be his first time leaving the main ship. The shuttle was small with just enough room for 2 people and their equipment. Lyra brought her scientific instruments, and Jake brought survival gear and food supplies. The flight to Frost Prime took 6 hours, and they spent the time talking about what they hoped to find there. Frost Prime was exactly what its name suggested. The entire planet was covered in ice and snow, with temperatures far below freezing. The sky was gray and windy with snow falling constantly. Jake was glad he had brought extra warm clothes, because even inside his heated suit, he could feel the cold trying to get in. They landed near some interesting ice formations that Lyra wanted to study. The plan was simple. They would set up a temporary camp and spend 2 days collecting samples, then return to the ship. Everything went well for the first day. Lyra found several types of ice that had unusual properties, and Jake helped her catalog everything they discovered. On the second day, the weather got worse. The wind picked up, and the snow fell so hard they could barely see 10 feet in front of them. Jake suggested they head back to the shuttle early, but Lyra wanted to finish collecting one more set of samples. They were working near a cliff when Jake heard a loud cracking sound. "Lyra, get away from there," he shouted, but it was too late. Ground under their shuttle gave way, and the whole thing slid down into a ravine. Jake and Lyra ran to the edge and looked down. Their shuttle was sitting at the bottom of a deep canyon with one wing completely broken off. There was no way they could climb down to reach it, and even if they could, it looked too damaged to fly. "This is not good," Lyra said, which was probably the biggest understatement Jake had ever heard. They activated their emergency beacon and sent a distress signal to the main ship. The response came back quickly, but it wasn't what they wanted to hear. The storm was too bad for a rescue mission, and they would have to wait at least 12 hours for the weather to clear. Jake looked around and found a small cave in the rocks. That would give them shelter from the wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than being out in the open. They gathered what supplies they could carry and made their way to the cave. Inside it was dark and cold, but at least they were protected from the storm. "We need to conserve body heat," Jake said, as he set up their emergency supplies. "The cave will help, but it's still going to be very cold tonight. What do you suggest?" Lyra asked. Jake looked at their situation and knew there was only one answer. "We should share body heat again, like we did that first night on the ship." Lyra's skin began to glow softly. "Ah, yes, the human friendship bonding ritual. This makes sense given our circumstances." "Right," Jake said, even though he still wasn't sure she completely understood. Just for warmth and survival, they spread out their emergency blankets and huddled together in the back of the cave. Lyra was shivering, and her skin had turned that darker purple color again. Jake wrapped his arms around her and tried to share as much warmth as possible. Gradually, they both stopped shivering and began to feel more comfortable. "Jake," Lyra said, quietly, "may I ask you about your family and your home world?" "Sure," Jake said. "What do you want to know?" Lyra asked him about his childhood and his parents, and what it was like growing up on Earth. Jake found himself telling her things he rarely talked about with anyone. He told her about his dog when he was little and how his grandmother taught him to cook. He explained how humans celebrated birthdays and holidays, and why music was important to them. In return, Lyra told him about Cepharian society and her own family. She explained that Cepharians didn't have nuclear families like humans did. Instead, they lived in large communities where everyone helped raise the young. She told him about the beautiful crystal cities on her home world and how Zephyrians could communicate through the patterns of light in their skin. "Your people sound amazing," Jake said. "I'd love to see your homeworld someday, and I would like to see Earth," Lyra replied. "Humans have such interesting ways of connecting with each other. This friendship bonding ritual, for example. It creates a feeling of safety and trust." Jake realized that even though Lyra had misunderstood what sharing a bed meant, she wasn't completely wrong about it creating connection. He did feel closer to her after their nights together. There was something about being vulnerable and trusting another person that made relationships stronger. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it does." They talked through most of the night, sharing stories and learning about each other's cultures. Jake discovered that Lyra had a great sense of humor and could make jokes that were actually funny. Lyra learned that humans used laughter to bond with each other and cope with difficult situations. When rescue finally came the next morning, Jake almost felt disappointed that their time in the cave was over. Captain Rodriguez was relieved to see them both safe and healthy. The shuttle was declared a total loss, but that seemed unimportant compared to their lives. Back on the ship, Lyra immediately went to her journal and began writing furiously. Jake watched her work and wondered what she was recording about their experience. Whatever it was, she seemed very excited about it, and her skin kept flickering with bright colors. "Important discoveries," she said when she noticed him watching. "Very important discoveries about human social bonding." Captain Rodriguez called Jake into her office 3 days after they returned from Frost Prime. The office was neat and organized with pictures of Earth on the walls and reports stacked carefully on her desk. She looked pleased when Jake walked in and gestured for him to sit down. "Lieutenant Morrison, I've been reviewing the reports from your mission with Lyra," she said. "I'm impressed with how well you two work together under difficult circumstances." "Thank you, Captain," Jake replied. "Lyra is easy to work with and very smart. The cooperation scores between you and your Zephyrian partner are the highest we've recorded so far," Captain Rodriguez continued. "Command is very interested in what makes your partnership so successful." Jake wasn't sure what to say to that. He and Lyra did work well together, but he didn't think they were doing anything special. They just talked to each other and tried to understand each other's point of view. "I want to extend your partnership for the full 6-month mission," the captain said. "You'll continue sharing quarters and working together on all diplomatic activities. This will give us valuable data about long-term human Zephyrian cooperation." "That sounds fine to me," Jake said. "I'll need to check with Lyra, but I think she'll agree." When Jake returned to their quarters, he found Lyra at her computer reading what looked like research papers. She had been doing this a lot lately, and Jake was curious about what she was studying so intensely. "Lyra," he said, "Captain Rodriguez wants us to continue our partnership for the whole mission. Are you okay with that?" Lyra turned to face him, and her skin glowed brightly. "Yes, I would like that very much. I have been hoping to continue our friendship bonding activities." "Friendship bonding activities," Jake repeated. "Yes," Lyra said, standing up and walking over to him. "I have been researching human social customs, and I understand now that the sleeping space sharing ritual is very important for creating strong friendships. I would like to request that we continue this practice." Jake felt his face get warm. "Lyra, you don't have to do that just because you think it's a human custom. We can be friends without sharing a bed, but my research shows that humans who engage in this ritual have stronger emotional bonds and better cooperation," Lyra said, pulling out her journal. "Look, I have documented evidence." She showed Jake pages of notes and observations about human crew members. She had been watching couples and close friends and recording how they interacted. Jake realized she had been treating their shared sleeping arrangements like a scientific experiment. I believe this practice has improved our working relationship significantly, Lyra continued. The trust and understanding we have developed through our nighttime conversations has made us better partners. Do you not agree? Jake had to admit she was right about that. Their talks before falling asleep had become his favorite part of each day. He learned something new about Zephyrian culture every night, and Lyra seemed genuinely interested in understanding human behavior. I suppose you're right, Jake said. If you want to continue, then I'm okay with it. Lyra's skin pulsed with bright colors that Jake was beginning to recognize as happiness. Excellent. I will prepare a formal research proposal documenting our methods. That night they settled into their now familiar routine of sharing Jake's bed and talking before sleep. Lyra had moved some of her belongings closer to Jake's side of the room, and the space felt more like it belonged to both of them. Jake, Lyra said as they lay under the blankets, tell me about human dreams. Do all humans experience these mental stories during sleep? Most of us do, Jake said. Sometimes they're about things that happen during the day, and sometimes they're completely random. What about Zephyrians? We do not dream as humans do, Lyra explained. During rest, our minds process information, but we do not create narrative experiences. Your dream stories sound very creative. They can be pretty weird sometimes, Jake said. Last night I dreamed I was flying through space without a ship. Flying through space, Lyra repeated. This represents a desire for freedom, perhaps, Jake laughed. Maybe. Or maybe it just means I ate too much before bed. Over the following weeks, their nighttime conversations covered everything from philosophy to favorite foods. Jake learned that Zephyrians had complex theories about the meaning of life, and that Lyra's favorite Earth food was chocolate cake. Lyra discovered that humans had an amazing ability to find humor in almost any situation, and that Jake's dream was to travel to every planet in the galaxy. During the day, they worked together on various diplomatic projects. They helped translate documents between human and Zephyrian languages. They observed meetings between the two species and made notes about communication problems. They also gave presentations to other crew members about what they had learned. Jake noticed that other crew members sometimes looked at them strangely when they walked together or sat close during meetings. He heard a few whispered conversations about their living arrangements, but he tried not to let it bother him. What he and Lyra were doing was helping both species understand each other better. One evening, Jake was in the ship's recreation room, playing pool with some other humans, when Lieutenant Collins made a comment that bothered him. "So Morrison knows your alien girlfriend," Collins said with a smirk. "I hear you two are pretty cozy these days." "She's not my girlfriend," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're working partners and friends, right?" Collins said. "Friends who share a bed every night. That's totally normal. We're participating in a cultural exchange program," Jake explained. "It's all perfectly professional." "Sure it is," Collins said, and his friends laughed. "I bet you're exchanging a lot of culture." Jake wanted to punch Collins in the face, but he knew that would only make things worse. Instead, he put down his pool stick and left the recreation room. The comments bothered him more than he wanted to admit, because part of him wondered if there was some truth to them. When he got back to his quarters, Lyra was sitting at her desk, working on her computer as usual. She looked up when he entered, and immediately her skin changed to a concerned yellow color. "Jake, you appear distressed," she said. "What has happened?" "Nothing important," Jake said, but he couldn't hide his mood from someone who had been studying his behavior so carefully. "Please tell me," Lyra said, standing up and walking over to him. "Perhaps I can help." Jake sat down on his bed and sighed. "Some of the other crew members have been making comments about us, about our living arrangements." "What kind of comments?" Lyra asked, sitting down beside him. "They think we're doing something inappropriate," Jake said. "They don't understand that this is just part of the cultural exchange program." Lyra was quiet for a moment, and her skin flickered through several different colors. "Do you believe we are doing something inappropriate?" she asked finally. "No," Jake said quickly. "Of course not. We're friends and colleagues. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing. Then why do their comments disturb you?" Lyra asked. Jake thought about that question. Why did he care what Collins and the others thought? He and Lyra weren't doing anything wrong. They were learning about each other's cultures and building a friendship that benefited both their species. "I guess I don't like people misunderstanding our friendship," Jake said. "What we have is special, and they're making it sound cheap." Lyra's skin glowed softly. "I agree that our friendship is special. The bond we have created through our shared experiences and conversations is very meaningful to me." "Me too," Jake said. And he realized it was completely true. "I look forward to our talks every night. You've become one of my closest friends." "And you are mine," Lyra said. "Perhaps that is what matters most." That night they talked about friendship and what it meant to both their species. Jake learned that Zephyrians rarely formed close individual bonds, preferring group relationships. Lyra was discovering that humans needed deep personal connections to be truly happy. Their friendship was teaching both of them something new about themselves and their own species. "Jake," Lyra said as they were falling asleep, "I am grateful for this opportunity to learn about human friendship customs, even if others do not understand what we are doing." "Yeah," Jake said. "Me too." 3 weeks later, the U.S. Harmony encountered something that would test everything Jake and Lyra had learned about working together. The ship's sensors detected another vessel approaching their position, and Captain Rodriguez called all senior staff to the bridge immediately. Jake and Lyra hurried through the corridors, wondering what kind of situation they were about to face. The bridge was busy with crew members at every station checking instruments and preparing for whatever was coming their way. On the main screen, could see a large dark ship that looked nothing like human or Zephyrian technology. Its hull was covered with sharp angles and strange markings that seemed to glow with their own light. "Contact established, Captain," the communications officer announced. "They're calling themselves the Krathan Dominion." Jake had never heard of the Krathan before, but from the worried expressions on everyone's faces, he could tell this wasn't good news. Captain Rodriguez stood in the center of the bridge, looking calm despite the tense situation. "Put them on screen," she ordered. The alien that appeared on the view screen was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was massive, with gray, scaly skin, and 4 red eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its face. When it spoke, its voice was deep and threatening, even through the universal translator. "I am Commander Vex of the Krathan War Fleet," the alien said. "You have entered territory claimed by the Dominion. Surrender your ship immediately, or be destroyed." "This is Captain Rodriguez of the U.S. Harmony," she replied calmly. "We are on peaceful diplomatic mission and have no territorial disputes with your people. All space belongs to the Krathan," Commander Vex growled. "Weaker species exist only to serve us. You will surrender or face the consequences." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Jake could see that everyone was thinking the same thing. The Krathan ship was much larger than the Harmony, and probably had more weapons. A direct fight would be suicide, but surrender wasn't really an option either. Analysis. Captain Rodriguez sighed. "Their ship has at least 3 times our firepower," the tactical officer reported. "But their technology seems outdated. They're probably stronger, but slower." "Options?" the captain asked. "We could try to outrun them," the navigation officer suggested. "Or attempt to negotiate." Captain Rodriguez looked at Jake and Lyra. "This might be an opportunity for our diplomatic team to prove their worth. Are you two willing to try talking?" To these Krathan, Jake felt his stomach drop, but he nodded. "Yes, Captain. We'll do our best. I believe Jake and I can work together effectively in this situation, Lyra added. Our partnership has prepared us for complex negotiations, the next few. Ours were the most intense of Jake's life. He and Lyra worked together to research everything they could find about the Krathen. They discovered that the Krathen were an aggressive warrior culture that had conquered dozens of worlds. They believed that might made right and respected only strength and cunning. This will be challenging, Lyra said as they prepared for the negotiations. The Krathen do not seem interested in peaceful solutions. We need to find something they want more than destroying us. Jake replied, every species has needs and desires. They spent hours developing a strategy that played to both human and Zephyrian strengths. Jake would handle the emotional and psychological aspects of the negotiation, while Lyra would focus on the logical and technical details. They had worked together so much that they could anticipate each other's thoughts and responses. When the negotiations began, Jake was nervous, but having Lyra beside him made him feel more confident. They sat at a conference table facing a view screen showing Commander Vex and several other Krathen officers. The aliens looked even more intimidating up close, with their red eyes and scarred faces. You wish to bargain for your lives, Commander, Vex said with what might have been amusement. This is unexpected. Most species simply beg for mercy. We're not here to beg, Jake said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. We're here to offer you something valuable. Speak quickly, Vex replied. My patience is limited. Jake and Lyra had agreed that their best chance was to appeal to Krathen pride and their desire for conquest. They offered to share information about other species in the galaxy, including their technological capabilities and territorial boundaries. This information would help the Krathen plan future conquests more effectively. Interesting, Commander Vex said after they finished their presentation. But how do we know you speak the truth? This was where their partnership really showed its value. Lyra presented detailed technical data that she had compiled from Zephyrian databases, while Jake added personal observations about human psychology and behavior. They worked together seamlessly, building on each other's points and covering for each other's weaknesses. The negotiations went on for hours, with the Krathen testing every claim and challenging every assumption. Jake found himself relying on everything he had learned about Lyra's analytical thinking, while she drew on her understanding of his intuitive approach to problem-solving. You fight well with words, Commander Vex finally admitted. This information has value to the Dominion. Then we have an agreement, Jake said. Perhaps, Vex replied, but I am curious about something. You two work together with unusual efficiency. How is this possible when you are different species? Jake and Lyra looked at each other, and Jake could see the same thought in her large silver eyes. We have learned to understand each other, Lyra said. Through shared experiences and open communication, we have built trust. Trust, Vex repeated, like it was a foreign concept. Krathen do not trust. We dominate or we are dominated. That's why you'll never be as strong as you could be, Jake said boldly. Real strength comes from cooperation, not just conquest. Commander Vex stared at them for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been laughter. Bold words from a small human. Very well. The Dominion accepts your offer. You may continue on your path. The transmission ended, and everyone on the bridge let out a collective sigh of relief. Captain Rodriguez congratulated Jake and Lyra on their successful negotiation, and Jake felt proud of what they had accomplished together. Later that evening, Jake was walking through the ship's corridors when he overheard a conversation that made his blood boil. Lieutenant Collins was talking to another crew member near the mess hall. I still think Morrison is taking advantage of that alien, Collins was saying. She doesn't understand human relationships, and he's manipulating her naivety. Maybe we should report it to the captain, the other officer suggested. I'm thinking about it, Collins replied. It's not right what he's doing, Jake stood in the corridor feeling angry and confused. He and Lyra had just saved the entire ship and crew, and people were still questioning their relationship. Worse, they were suggesting that he was somehow hurting Lyra or taking advantage of her. When he returned to their quarters, Jake was still upset and trying to hide it. But Lyra noticed immediately when his breathing changed and his posture became tense. "Jake, something is troubling you again," she said, looking up from her work. "Is it the same issue as before?" "Yeah," Jake said, sitting heavily on his bed. "Some people think I'm taking advantage of you. They think you don't understand human customs, and I'm somehow manipulating you." Lyra set down her journal and turned to face him fully. "Do you believe you are taking advantage of me?" she asked. "No," Jake said firmly. "But maybe they have a point. Maybe I should have explained things better from the beginning." "Explained what things?" Lyra asked. Jake took a deep breath and decided it was time to be completely honest. "Lyra, I need to tell you something about human sleeping customs. The truth is that most human friends don't actually share beds. That's usually something that romantic partners do or people do in emergencies." Lyra's skin flickered through several colors before settling on a soft blue. "I see," she said quietly. "I should have been clearer about that from the start," Jake continued. "I didn't want to embarrass you or make you feel like you had misunderstood. So our friendship bonding ritual is not actually a common human practice," Lyra said. "Not exactly, no," Jake admitted. "I mean, it's not wrong or inappropriate. It's just not typical." Lyra was quiet for several minutes, and Jake worried that he had offended her or damaged their friendship. Finally, she spoke. "Jake, may I ask you a question?" she said. "Of course, regardless of whether this is a typical human custom, do you believe our shared sleeping arrangements have been beneficial to our partnership?" Jake thought about that. "Yes, definitely. Our conversations have helped us understand each other better and work together more effectively." "And do you enjoy our time together?" Lyra asked. "Very much," Jake said. "You've become one of my closest friends." Lyra's skin began to glow softly. "Then perhaps it does not matter whether this is a typical human custom. What matters is whether it has value for us." Jake looked at her in surprise. "You're not upset that I didn't explain things correctly?" "Should I be upset?" Lyra asked. "You have treated me with kindness and respect. You have shared your thoughts and feelings with me. You have helped me understand humanity better than any textbook could. These are the actions of a true friend." Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "So you want to continue our arrangement, if you are willing," Lyra said. "I have found great value in our friendship regardless of whether it follows typical human or Zephyrian patterns." The next morning, Jake woke up feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The honest conversation with Lyra had cleared the air between them, and he no longer worried about whether they were doing something wrong. As he got dressed for the day, he noticed Lyra sitting at her desk with her journal open, but she wasn't writing anything. "Everything okay?" Jake asked. Lyra turned to look at him, and her skin was flickering through colors he had never seen before. "Jake, I must tell you something important." "What is it?" Jake said, sitting down beside her. "I have not been completely honest with you about my understanding of human customs," Lyra said carefully. "Several weeks ago, I discovered the truth about human sleeping arrangements through my research." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I learned that sharing beds is typically reserved for romantic partners or emergency situations," Lyra continued. "I found academic papers and cultural studies that explain the actual customs very clearly." "Then why didn't you say anything?" Jake asked, feeling confused and a little hurt. Lyra's skin shifted to a warm golden color. "Because I also discovered something else through my research. I learned that humans often choose to create their own customs and traditions when they find value in them." Jake stared at her, trying to understand what she was saying. "I read about human friends who created unique rituals together Lyra explained. Camping trips where they shared sleeping spaces. College roommates who continued living together by choice. Military partners who formed bonds through shared hardship. I realized that humans are very adaptable in their social customs. So you knew, Jake said slowly. You knew, and you chose to continue anyway. Yes, Lyra said, and her skin pulsed with bright colors. I chose to continue because I found great value in our arrangement. The conversations we shared and the trust we built was unlike anything I had experienced before. Jake felt a mix of relief and amazement. But why didn't you tell me you knew? I was not certain how you would react, Lyra admitted. I thought you might feel embarrassed or want to stop if you knew I understood the truth. I did not want to lose something so meaningful. Jake looked at Lyra and realized that her decision showed just how much she valued their friendship. She had been willing to let him think she was naive rather than risk ending something important. To both of them. I'm not embarrassed, Jake said. I'm impressed. You figured out something about human nature that most humans don't even realize. What is that? Lyra asked. That the best relationships are the ones we choose to create together. Jake said, not the ones that follow someone else's rules over the following days. Jake found himself seeing their relationship in a new light. What they had built together wasn't based on misunderstanding or cultural confusion. It was a conscious choice that both of them had made because it brought value to their lives. They had created their own tradition that worked for them regardless of what anyone else thought about it. The remaining weeks of their mission passed quickly. Jake and Lyra continued their nightly conversations and grew even closer as friends. They worked together on several more diplomatic projects, and their success rate impressed everyone on the ship. Other human Zephyrian partnerships began asking for advice on how to build better cooperation. Captain Rodriguez called them into her office during the final week of the mission. She looked pleased as she reviewed their files and performance reports. I've never seen partnership scores this high, she said. Command wants to know your secret. How have you two achieved such effective cooperation? Jake and Lyra looked at each other and smiled. We learned to understand each other, not just as representatives of our species, but as individuals, Lyra said. We created customs that worked for both of us rather than trying to follow someone else's rules. We spent time together outside of work requirements, Jake added. Real friendship takes more than just professional interaction. Interesting, Captain Rodriguez said, making notes. Command is recommending that future human Zephyrian partnerships adopt similar close quarters arrangements. They want to establish a formal program based on your methods. Jake felt proud that their friendship would help other humans and Zephyrians work together better. At the same time, he realized that what he and Lyra had created couldn't just be copied by other people. Every partnership would need to find their own way. On their last night together on the ship, Jake and Lyra lay in their shared bed talking about what would happen next. Lyra had been offered a position as the first Zephyrian ambassador to Earth, and Jake had been assigned to help her transition to her new role. Are you nervous about living on Earth? Jake asked. A little, Lyra admitted, but I am excited to continue learning about human culture. And I am grateful that I will not have to learn alone. You'll never be alone, Jake said. We're friends and friends stick together. Jake, Lyra said softly. May I ask you something? Always. When we reach Earth, will you be willing to continue our tradition? She asked. I know that other humans might not understand, but I would like to maintain our friendship. Ritual if possible. Jake smiled in the darkness. Of course, it's our tradition now. We can do whatever we want. Our tradition, Lyra repeated, and her skin glowed with happiness. I like that. They talked for another hour about their plans for Earth and all the things Lyra wanted to see and experience. Jake told her about his favorite places and promised to show her everything from mountains to oceans to big cities. Lyra shared her excitement about studying human society from the inside, rather than just reading about it in books. When they finally fell asleep, Jake realized that their friendship had become something he had never expected when he first walked into their shared quarters months ago. What started as a simple roommate arrangement had grown into one of the most important relationships of his life. 6 months later, Jake stood in the audience of the Galactic Council chambers watching Lyra give her first speech as Earth's Zephyrian ambassador. She spoke eloquently about the importance of understanding between species and the value of creating new traditions together. Her skin glowed with confidence as she addressed the assembled delegates from dozens of worlds. After her speech, Jake met Lyra backstage and congratulated her on her success. "You were amazing up there," he said. "Thank you," Lyra replied. "I could not have done this without everything I learned about human friendship and cooperation." That evening, they returned to their shared apartment in the diplomatic quarter of Geneva. It was larger than their quarters on the ship, with separate bedrooms and a beautiful view of Lake Geneva. But every night they still chose to share Jake's bed and talk about their day. Before falling asleep, some people still found their arrangement strange, but many others had come to understand and respect it. Jake's grandmother visited once and immediately loved Lyra, calling her the best thing that had ever happened to her grandson. Other diplomatic partnerships began experimenting with similar close living arrangements, and many reported improved cooperation and understanding. "Jake," Lyra said one evening as they watched the sunset over the lake, "do you ever regret that first night when we shared sleeping space to stay warm?" "Never," Jake said without hesitation. "That was the beginning of the best friendship I've ever had." "Mine as well," Lyra said, and her skin pulsed with the warm golden color that Jake now knew meant deep contentment. Sometimes the most meaningful things begin with misunderstandings. Or maybe they begin with understanding that's deeper than either person realizes, Jake suggested. "Yes," Lyra agreed. "I think that is exactly right." As the stars came out over Geneva, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed since that first awkward night on the ship. He had learned that friendship could transcend species boundaries and cultural differences. He had discovered that the best relationships were built on choice and mutual respect rather than rigid social rules. Most importantly, he had found a friend who would be part of his life forever. Their tradition of sharing sleeping space and nightly conversations had started as a practical solution to staying warm. It had grown into something much more meaningful, because both of them had chosen to value it and nurture it. They had created something new together that honored both their backgrounds while being uniquely their own. And if other people thought sharing a bed was just a human thing, well, Lyra believed it, and Jake wasn't arguing. After all, the best traditions were the ones you chose to create with the people who mattered most.